of my favorite entrepreneurs, Chen Chow. Welcome to the show.
Hi Shazwan, hi Aman. Great to see y'all.
Thank you so much for coming.
Great
So
to see
Chen
you.
Chow, he is the founder of Fave, but I will let Chen Chow talk through what Fave does in a bit. But for me, right, I use Fave to find good deals, Chen Chow, for like restaurants or spa, like it's the kind of thing where you just scroll around to see like what's the
Yeah.
deal of the week, And Chen Chow, he's worked in Groupon, Job Street, and even Accenture at once upon a time, Chen Chow, right? Am I correct to say that?
Yes. Yeah, correct.
So Chen Chow, I think we're gonna
Nice.
ask you a very basic entrepreneurial question, right? So how did this all start? Like, what inspired you to start Fave as it, with your T-shirt even? What was sort of your motivation?
Yeah, I think interesting. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me in the Kopi Conversations. Yeah, so I think actually maybe I'll go back the journey, right? So I think we actually started this journey in 2015, and actually 2015 at the time it was not even Faith. So Joe and myself, we just left Groupon. So we were working there for a few years, and I think you only live once. You also decided to just quit, and at that time because we couldn't do many things because of the non-compete against Groupon. So we end up did KFit, right? So KFit is sort of a fitness sharing platform. I think for those people, maybe it's like similar like ClassPass. And I know KFit and me doesn't jive that well. People call me K-Fat, unfortunately.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but we went through that. So we did 1 year in that journey, building up KFit. And I think as we built through KFit 1 year pass through, so in the 2016 second half, we went on to started going to soft launch phase, right? And I think that time we knew they were going to go to local commerce, that means the offline businesses and help offline businesses to digitize. But I think that time it's like, okay, it's a marketplace, it's chicken and egg, right? So you need merchants to get customers, you need customers to get merchants. So we have neither, so we have to go sort of build it through. So at that time we just sort of like, okay, have never bought company before. So we actually went on to acquired Groupon in the subsidiaries of Groupon. So we started with Indonesia first, and then we bought over Malaysia, and then we did Singapore. So these were all in the second half of 2016 to early 2017. Yeah, I think so. I think that journey back then was a lot of just excitement and thinking, okay, we're gonna build a segment. We actually didn't know what it entails, right? Buying a company. We literally just negotiate with them. And then when they told us the price, we're like, oh, no, maybe this price. Then they asked us what multiples, what basis. We're like, no, feel like expensive lah, give me cheaper. So literally,
Asian behavior lah.
yeah.
Were those
Haggle.
simpler times?
Sorry?
Were those simpler times, or does it get easier?
I think it is a lot of ups and downs, right? So I think a lot of time when you think things get better, things are going to get tougher. When things are going like super tough, super crazy, everything, then it's like, oh, things are going to get better, right? So I think a lot of this part and parcel of life is lots of ups and downs, lots of surprises. When we think we are very confident, things will go well, things are going to screw up. When things go so bad, it's like, okay, oh, don't know whether we can last through or not, then things will get better, right? So I think it's a lot of that as we go through this journey, right? So I think why we start, I think a lot of things we just think of, okay, how do we help the merchants to digitize, get them to enhance their capability to compete, and then consumer how to get the best offer, best deals, best cashbacks. I think no one want to be paying more expensive. So I think it's sort of just that. And I think the other one is also, I think, working with people. I think the team that we had, I think a lot of them met in Groupon, built together, left Groupon. Some of them, I think the earlier days people were in Youth Asia as well with Joel. So I think Azumi, Audra, they all. So I think then eventually the whole thing connect through, and then we built this journey. So there have been lots of ups, downs through that journey. Yeah, over the last few years.
I guess that's a whole. I guess the journey of up and down will always be a norm in an entrepreneur's life, lah. So, Chen Chow like Fave helps to digitalize tens of thousands of local businesses, restaurants, cafes, and I feel like it's been a buzzword that's been thrown around a lot, especially during COVID, on like digitalization. So maybe you can share us with us is why is digitalization so important? Yeah, so you can share a little bit on that.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think a lot of times it's a buzzword and people talk about it, everything, right? But I think in the end, right, I think you net everything out. I think in the end is I think if you think of the businesses, right, whether it's a makcik they're running a stall or a cafe owner or a big chain, I think in the end for them is how do you grow their business, right, and how to cut their costs. I
Yeah.
think you net it out is that, right? So I think for them is as we go through all this journey, in the end is are we going to help them to get customers easier? Are we going to help them to get customers faster? To help them to monetize better? How to help them to reduce costs? So I think a lot of it, you go back to the simpler buzzword is easier, cheaper, better, faster, right? So I think so digitalization means nothing if it's like, oh, after you add digital process, it becomes slower. And then there's
Yeah.
no point, right? If it became more expensive, then there's no point. So I think a lot of it is, I would say, start from those fundamentals, right? If whatever process that today you're going through, let's say that if imagine you have traditional businesses, I know that COVID happened and everything. So now you look at, okay, now what you do today, how to make it faster, how to make it easier, cheaper, and start from there. And digitalization is one of the ways. It may not be the cure all, right? But I think it's one of the ways to
Mhm.
make it. And the test is, did it really reduce your cost? Did it really make it faster, easier, right? And can it help you scale? Because a lot of the time, traditional businesses is that, let's say if you want to double your business, you know, double your cost. But then I think with technology now these days, you don't need to, right? So a lot of time there's economy of scales and be able to scale up through. And I think a lot of time is as you grow more, sometimes the cost per unit is actually even lower because you have economy of scale, right? Network effect and all those kind of things. So I think digitalization is a lot of going on that. And I think some people may be also scared of the word digitalization, right? So I
Yep,
think
that's
especially
true.
a lot of traditional businesses, like they're not familiar with technology, especially machi, pachi, 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old. They're like, oh, this is so scary, right? Oh, would I suddenly my money disappear? Would suddenly this thing, that thing, right? So and some of them also maybe sometimes they have been cheated by people. They may be like sometimes some vendors go to them and say, hey, you need to pay 2,000 ringgit, 5,000 ringgit to go
Mm-hmm.
on this, and end up
Mm-hmm.
nothing happened, right? Or things just get worse, right? So I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
it is how do you make it simpler and how do you get people to really get the real effect from there. So I think that's how maybe how I see it.
Mhm. So that's the mental barriers or the psychological barrier to digitalize the business, right? But do you find that infrastructure or the readiness of businesses to digitalize themselves also a challenge?
Yeah, I think good question. I think yeah. So I think that these days, I think let's say we turn back the clock, let's say 5 years ago, internet speed is a lot slower. But I think today, suburb to urban, I think internet space is no longer a challenge. I think, of course, rural side, I think maybe there are still some parts of it. But I think today, let's say, imagine looking at the people around us, most people already have internet, right? So
Yeah.
I think the technology barrier, the infrastructure barrier is or become less already. So I think a lot of it is that then as we go on this journey, is now how do you use all these things as an enabler to drive those aspects, right? So I think so a lot of times when I go to speak to businesses, right? So whether restaurant owners, spa owners, or even cafes and whatnot, right? A lot of times I'll ask them, what do you wish to achieve, right? That today on your own you can't achieve. Right? And a lot of times is what's the problem that you currently face? What's the pain point, right? And I think a lot of that understanding from there, then only you go connect back at the technology. Rather than go there and make them, oh, hey, how about you get this solution A, solution B, solution C, solution D, right? I think a lot of people don't think in that way, right?
Mhm.
So then a lot of time is so we need to go back to fundamental and I think make them understand. I still remember that there was one time I went to one makcik, right, to try to explain to her to do cashless. And I think that her reply was like, oh, makcik dah tua, I dah berniaga 30 tahun. I don't need all
Mhm.
this thing, right? I have enough to spend. Making more money no longer excites me. I think I'm fine, lah, right? I am. So I think a lot of it is that those kind of barrier, right? Going through. And I think that this COVID, right, I think what it does is that for some businesses, some aspects, suddenly, if they're not digitized, it suddenly hit them, right, significantly.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the aspects that I think drive a lot. So as an example, one of the digitalization process was digital signature. So I think back then, a lot of times people would meet face to face to sign, right?
Yeah.
And we have always wanted to drive digital signature for a few years already. But the adoption rate is maybe 50%, 60%. During COVID, it became 100% because everyone now can suddenly do digital signature, right? So even like, let's say example, we want to get one of the chain franchise go on board, right, for
Yeah.
cashless. Back then, they would say, oh, wait, September 5th, all our franchise owner from the whole
Mhm.
country will come down KL so then we can do training on that day. And you look at September 5th, it's actually 5 weeks later. But these days, is doing it right. Use the same technology like Zoom. They were like, okay, 3 days later, Zoom call everyone. Okay, now you can learn and you
No
can
more
do.
excuses.
No more excuses.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. So
Yeah, and I think that during the COVID period, right, that 6 weeks where everyone locked at home, there's no excuse that oh I'm traveling lah, I'm at, out here, nothing, right? Everyone's at home, right? And of course that affect everything as well because the hours, working hours suddenly became day and night, and I think that's why a lot of those late night calls, late night everything started to happen as well.
So Chen Chow, I wanted to just bring back a little bit, right? Because you mentioned like your experience with like makciks and pakciks who, maybe not really 100% buy into the digitalization of their businesses, right? So I think I just wanted to ask when you were building Fave, or even now, right? Maybe the problem is the same. Like, what were the things you saw and in the challenges that you face when wanting to bring all these merchants on board? Because obviously you get a spectrum from people who just they want to cashless everything, from someone who just wants to accept cash and doesn't want
Mm.
anything to do with digitalization. So I just wanted to get a feel of Fave's
Yeah.
experience on this.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So, and I think that this today with a lot of players, a lot of cashless, a lot of e-wallets, everyone driving that because it helps to push through, right? Because a lot of businesses, once they accept one type of payment, cashless payment, digital payments, they will accept the rest. So I think a lot of it, the drive. So I think a lot of time people say, oh, e-wallets or cashless has so many competitors. Actually, our competitors is not each other. Actually, our competitors is actually cash. People that who don't want to adopt anything, right? So I think it's driving that. And I think as you look through across, right? So let's say outside of KL, a lot of second, third generation business that their parents, grandparents built and then pass it down, right? So a lot of time the younger generation, the Gen Y, Gen Zs, actually want to adopt, but then they couldn't get their parents' approval. Because the parents was like, no, 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 I have run this business for last 30 years. I know this works and how. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is resistance to change. People used to doing it for so long, doesn't want to change. So I think that's one, right? I think that's typically one of the barrier. And second is I think fear of mistakes, fear of things disappear, right? Whether the money suddenly disappear, whether it will be in it. So I think a lot of it is also, I think what a lot of times what we see businesses they get on board is also their peers encouraging them. So let's say example when we go to explain to them, they may not fully buy in, but once their next stall, next shops tell them that, hey, this works, they actually pick
Mhm.
it up better, right? So I think that's another one that I think we
It's
we, we start
it's like they
seeing
need
that.
some peer pressure from their own community as well.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah, and I think that's another one. And I think that after, especially just after COVID, a lot of people did not go to ATM to withdraw money. So I think there are too many times that people go out with almost
Yeah,
no
you're
cash.
right.
That's true.
So then they lost customers. And I think that's where they drive them towards, oh yeah, maybe now we need to, right? So I think that's one part that I think people take that steps through. So I think that's one part, right? And I think the other one is businesses. If you look at it, like some of the bigger size businesses, I think back then they were like, okay, I don't need my business is good all this while, right? And then actually there are quite a lot of chains where they were actually the slower adopter than those 1, 2, 3 outlets one. And this COVID actually bring up a lot of chains that get come on board to cashless payments as well, digital payments, everything. So I think that's another aspect. And I think when you say cashless and all this kind of digitalization, it's not just payments, right? Payments is step one. So I think a lot of time we go back to drive them towards loyalty, upsell, cross-sell, analytics, operations, financing. So I think it's getting through the whole chain, getting them one step at a time, right? So I think that's one. And I think that's where driving that. And I think let's say from event standpoints, whether from retail. So I think a lot of them is gradually on adopt to that. Right? I think that's how I
So
see it.
if I'm getting this right, what you're saying is, Chen Chow, going cashless enables you to do more things for your customer base. You can get data points to retain them longer. You can also upsell on things rather than just paying cash where you can't really keep track of who is the customer. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think maybe let's take example, right? So I think of back then, let's say I'm quite sure that you may have gone to some coffee place where they give you a paper stamp card, a
Oh
piece of
yeah.
paper
Yep,
where
yep.
they stamp first
I
time.
always lost it
Yeah.
Yeah.
all the
So
time.
as a consumer, you lose it. As a business, after you take that piece of paper outside of the shop, they actually don't know where you are. They cannot contact you. They don't know whether you are the fifth stamp, seventh stamp until you go back to the shop. Right. So I think that's sort of one example, right? Where things, and then the other one is sometimes when you go eat, they give you a piece of it, voucher receipt and say, hey, come back next time. You can get the $5 off, $10 off. A lot of times after they go out, they actually don't know. Or those good old days, the flyers at the people's house. So I think a lot of those kind of things now they are able to track, right? And I think of a lot of e-commerce. Today, people leverage on data. I know that this is a first-time customer, repeat customers, upsell, cross-sell, analytics. What time your shop should go discount? What
Mhm.
time is actually your peak hour? Because a lot of businesses, they actually just go pay on memory. Let's say, how can a business know that, hey, actually my retention is not good, right? And or whatnot, right? So I think that's some of the aspects. So I think one of the things that we actually also did was that we actually every month analyze their business and give them 20, 30 slides. And these are all fully built by machine learning automation. So there's no human being building the slides. So think of it is like in a traditional world, big companies like Starbucks and McDonald's, they will have analysts sitting in the office drawing out slides and say, oh, you're this outlet doing this, you're this thing doing that, your this reviews of this Mid Valley outlets not as good as Manutama. Your 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Tuesday to Thursday is not good. Your retention of this segment age group is not ideal. So the big companies may be able to do it. But if you're today running a cafe or a store, you'll never be able to do that. So I think it's how do you do it? So I think one way to simplify thinking on it as we go digitalization is how do you close up the gap between those big chain and the smaller ones, right? Because or else the big ones will get further and further. And then basically they will get more scales and everything that do the things that the smaller outlets can't do. So I think where we want to do is actually level the playing field so that anyone, the small ones, can do the same. So example, even taking like credit card payments. Today, in a traditional terminal way, the big chain, let's say the hypermarkets, the big chain will get a credit card rate maybe closer to 1%. But if today you open a single shop or single cafe, you get a 1.5, 2%, 2.5%. So I think the way we came in is like, okay, how do you ensure the small shops also pay 1% so that they don't overpay versus the shop, right? So I think a lot of those efforts is thinking, let's say even financing.
Yeah.
The big ones, the banks will knock on their door and change and say, hey, can I lend you money? If you today you run a small cafe, you go to bank and ask them, they ask you, hey, give me 3-year profit first before you do it. So I think it's how do we narrow this gap and doing it. So I think a lot of time using data, because a lot of times using data, you'll be able to prove that, okay, this business actually is growing. This aspect customer is actually happy with you and whatnot, right? So I think it's using that to make it more efficient and everything.
So Chen Chow, I just wanted to follow up from what you just said about, digitalization and all the things you've said about analytics and using loyalty and things like that to build up small businesses, right? Can you share maybe like just a quick story or success story of some, or maybe one of your, smaller merchants who actually used Fave to bring up their business to the next level?
Oh, good. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of single stalls or let's say maybe a small merchant. I will take this cafe called Pie Kingdom in Bangsa, right? There's single outlet, one cafe there, right? And I think that through adoption of this thing, cashless loyalty, they're able to drive the retention and compete against a big chain. Because I think in Bangsa South, I think basically there is Starbucks, Coffee Bean, San Francisco Coffee, all the big ones are there. So the smaller ones, how do you retain your customers? How do you be able to track that, right? So I think that's where they came in. And of course, I think there's also a lot of garais and whatnot, right? So I think back then, YB Fahmi Fazil, he, he has one of these roti canai outlet in Kampung Kerinci. So I think that we actually work with him to go and digitize that, right? So that the pakcik that does the roti canai can also come on board on all these things. And I'm quite sure that I think, and it's not just I think what Fave does. I think the industry, everyone does that. I think let's say Pasar Ramadan, I know Touch and Go did it with Kampung Baru. Whether I think Boost did quite a lot of things. Grab did it. Maybank. I think Maybank did a local during this year Ramadan. So I think it's an industry effort, right, where everyone try to connect that dots into multiple play. And I think that's how I see it. Where I think the playing field and the ability to drive that, I think, is huge, right? And I think each of those, I think, would help through. And I think recently in the Penjana, I think one of the initiative was a micro SME. So I think Fave is one of the platforms that work through Penjana to get businesses that is not yet on digitalization to come on board digitalization for the first time. And I think where finance ministry, MDEC, and in this case Fave, but of course they are working with a bunch of platforms as well, right? And we all basically come together to support businesses that not yet digitized to come on board digitalization, right? And I think that's sort of the push to get people to try it, sample it, and go through.
Yeah, we definitely gonna ask you more on the Penjana plan because we're quite curious about that. Shaz, when did we go to Indonesia for Tech in Asia? Was it last year?
October. No,
October.
November last year. Yeah, we went to
Yeah.
Tech in Asia.
So Chen Chow, we went to Tech in Asia. We stayed in this shady hotel. So it was in Jakarta. But we noticed that a lot of the small shops by the side of the road, they all have cashless payment. They all have, I don't remember the name of the wallet. I think it was Dana or something like that. And and it's funny when you mentioned that you actually went to Indonesia before you went to Malaysia. I always thought that Malaysia was the first. So because Fave operates in a lot of countries, so you have a lot of experience in digitalizing these merchants, right? Can you share us a little bit on your view on where are Malaysia in terms of the digitalization stage of their merchants compared to other countries around the region? Just to give us like a brief overview.
Great. Yeah, and I think just want to talk about Tech in Asia that last year in Indonesia. I was there that weekend because I met
Oh,
up
you were
with
there?
some
Oh,
Malaysians
really?
there.
Nice.
Yeah, I was not at the Tech in Asia conference, but I was in town. So remember that a few Malaysian entrepreneurs were actually having dinner next to the conference hotel place. Yeah. So I think where we see, right. So I think if you think of cashless or even take e-wallets, right, is that is actually counter or opposite against credit card penetration. So let's say if you look at Southeast Asia, Singapore credit card penetration is actually the highest. In terms of e-wallets and also this kind of other than credit cards kind of cashless, Singapore actually is the toughest to get adoption because people already quite used to take a credit card and just tap it and then go away, right? They don't have a pain point. Whereas if you flip the other way, take Indonesia. So Indonesia, prior to this, only I think 3% to maybe 2% or 3% of the population own a piece of credit cards. Before that, they actually have to use rupiah, the cash itself, to pay for everything. And then when you go pay anything, you need all the small change and everything, right? And it's actually very difficult. So the cashless as they go on Indonesia, and I think the wallet, whether OVO, GoPay, Dana, I think it get a good adoption because it solve a problem where people doesn't have change. And I think I'm quite, like a lot of time when I was in Jakarta a few years ago, where when I go to the taxi, almost always they'll tell me no change. And then they will take my extra money, right? So whether my ride is 25,000 or 30,000, I give them 50,000, there's always no change. So I end up paying 50,000, right, for that rides, right? So that has a free of benefit. And then because I think Indonesia also has a lot of those Gojek, the bike, right? The Grab bike, Gojek kind of bike where you sit down. So those
Yep.
are maybe 8,000 rupiah, 10,000 rupiah, which is about 2 ringgit kind of thing. A lot of time they also don't have the change. So I think the cashless in Indonesia, it helps to drive that. And I think up to a certain extent, Vietnam, Philippines has that kind of thing. And I think Malaysia and Thailand are stuck somewhere in the middle, where certain segment of society has a credit card and certain segment of society has an experience similar to Indonesia, right? Where people are still using cash and for everything. So I think Malaysia, the adoption today, I think the last couple of few years, I think has been pretty fast, right? I think government have been driving various initiatives as well, whether from E29 to now Penjana, the various aspects to drive through. And I think to get businesses on it. And I think today the signboard cash only is a lot less already. I think versus let's say 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right? Where you go to shops, they are like,
Cash
no, no,
only.
no,
Yeah.
cash only.
Yep.
Credit card machines for the early days of e-wallet, you go there, the machine is always never charged, right? So I think today the things have shifted significantly, but I think there's still a long way to go. Of course, question is whether in this part of the world, would it be like China? So last year, December, I was lucky that Alibaba gave me a chance to spend my time at Hangzhou, right? So spend 2 weeks at this program called eFounders and experience the life of 2 weeks in China. I have never used any currency. Anything and everywhere I go is all Alipay, right?
For a whole 2 weeks. Okay.
For the whole 2 weeks. Even toilet, if I want to get toilet paper, it's also Alipay.
Even the smaller
So
merchants also have Alipay, right? Or
yeah,
WeChat as
everywhere.
well, right?
Yeah. I was telling myself that I want to try to find one place that doesn't accept and I couldn't find it, right? So even beggars use Alipay, right? Or WeChat Pay. So
Wow.
everything. Right? And it became the default, right? So, and if you lose your phone, you actually can't operate, right? So if I want a bicycle on the street, I just open up, scan the QR, I took the bicycle away, right? I need a power bank from somewhere, I just take it, right? And I can return anywhere because it's tied to your account. So if you don't return that power bank, you can't pay at anywhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't borrow another bicycle after that. So basically, and I think I see how China transformed completely, right? My first trip to China to 2004, China was far backward, much more backward than a lot of countries, like including Malaysia. And I think over the few years where this digitalization and all everything drive, they actually leapfrog, right? Let's say I go to restaurants, almost every single restaurants, I'm just scanning QR and I pay my order myself and pay myself. I don't need to deal with any human being, right? And so, and some for those China citizens, they even use facial recognition to go through, right? So I think a lot of that, I think that sort of have leaped through, right? And I think for us now, we are sort of in the middle zone. I think that today the inflection point is more or less there, where let's say today, I think people are less reliant on promotion to use cashless. I think in the
Yeah.
earlier days, if no promo, I don't use, right? I go
Yeah.
back to cash. But today, let's say if you give the people and say everything same price, no one has any discount promo, which one will you use? Right. So I think that's sort of where we are at. Yeah.
I see. Okay, that's a good point. Now, we wanted to go back to the Penjana question because because there was sort of something we were curious because obviously, this time around, a lot of companies are going through digital transformation, right? And I think I stumbled across an article on the Edge about Penjana and how Fave is collaborating with all the other sort of agencies like MDEC, and looking at really really building up the micro, small, and medium enterprises in Malaysia, right? Because I guess they're the ones who got hit the most because of this pandemic. So we both of us wanted to ask, like, why do you think Fave is the right platform to champion this change, right? Why is Fave going to basically, some of the problems that they're facing are literally, they gotta fire people, they gotta cut costs, no money is coming into their account, so obviously they are focusing on how to fix that. So how do you think
Yeah.
it can actually help them, go through this crisis together, I guess?
Yeah, and I think that for this MDEC MOF one, for this part of MS micro SME as well as Shop Malaysia, I think they work with 10 platforms. So basically, including Touch and Go, Boost, Grab, Foodpanda, Maybank, Lazada, Shopee, Fashion Valley, and I think got one more. The name just slipped me. So, but basically, they work with 10 platforms, right? So, I think the way each of us come with slightly different aspects, and I think if you look at it, the e-wallets actually coming stamping from consumer, right? So, e-wallets basically, in a way, is like a future digital bank, right?
Yeah.
They basically driving towards for consumer. Whereas I think for Fave, we focus on merchants. So I think we go in as a merchant digital platform. How do we help merchant to digitize? So I think that, I'm maybe not sure whether, I think some of you may have seen, right? During COVID, there was like this famous on social media, WhatsApp, where people talk about what drives digitalization, right? Is it the CEO,
Mm.
CIO, CTO, or COVID, right?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is COVID, right? I think a lot of things that back then everyone was driving it, it couldn't move that fast. COVID came, everything moved, right? So I think in this Pajana things, I think our goal is to bring businesses, especially the small, medium enterprise that haven't dared to come on board. I think this time where MDEC, MOF, and Fave in this case, or through other initiatives where other platforms, I think we are all trying coming together to basically subsidize the cost so that businesses will go in and try. So let's say for FavePay, between now till end of September, every FavePay promo is basically times two, right? So basically, if you see a place with 10% cashback, you can key in a promo code eCashback, you get another 10% of eCashback. So I think it's driving that to get, so we tell businesses if you give 5%, this initiative will match your 5%. If you give 10%, we will match the 10%. If you give 20%, we'll match the 20%, right? So let's say like Pasta Panas is giving 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to Pasta Panas, you're going to get the 20% that Pasta Panas give, and also the 20% that MOF, MDEC, and Fave give. So then you actually get a 40% cashback, right? So that makes that meal significantly cheaper, right? And I think that drive through. Because Pasar Panas is a bigger player, but of course there's a lot of smaller players, smaller stalls, right? And I think is these initiatives, I think so far right now we are working with close to 15, 20,000 outlets to drive this. And I think it's constantly looking at it and see how can we bring the impact. And I think as during this Panjana, I think what the government did was working with all the platforms. I think all the platforms trying not to see that we are trying to drive our own, but I think all come together. Because this pandemic is bigger than what each and any one of us can solve, right?
Yeah.
Bigger than any country can solve. And I think in the end is how do you stimulate the economy? How do you drive reduction of job losses? How do you drive back the rebounds? How do you ensure all these things, right? So, and I think for every driving of the economy helps to reduce the job loss. And I think that's where all these efforts all come together to to work together to bring that. And I think that's where the Panjana aspects coming in. And I think for us it's a national service and national call together, right? And to drive this synergy. And I think for Faith, especially this is one of the first time that we really work in a large scale with government.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of learning curve for us to learn how to work together as well. And I think that the whole thing was actually run through within few weeks. I think the finance minister, the Safro, and MOF team first started meeting up with all the platforms. And then from there, after a couple of meetings, MDEC came in and basically drive that through, right? So I think it was pretty interesting that how all these aspects, everyone put aside their own agenda and come together to drive that.
Yeah, I mean that sounds amazing, right? I think
Yep.
we'll see in the next
It's
couple of
not easy.
months. Yeah, it's not easy. You'll see in the next couple of months how this goes. So Chencha, I think we're approaching the end. Wanted to ask last maybe two questions. So where, like, how do you see Faith like in the future? Like, what's the ideal state that you see Faith become in the next, couple of years, 5, 10, or whatever it is, lah? Just to paint a
Yeah.
picture for all of us, lah.
Yeah, so I think for us, the way we see is we'll continue to play focus on the merchant side. So as a merchant digital platform, help merchant side to digitize. And I think work even closer with a lot of the consumer platform. So when I say consumer platforms, could be the e-wallets, could be the e-commerce, could be anyone, the banks, the telcos, anyone that has a lot of consumer base. Whereas I think we'll bring the merchant base and how do we connect that dot. And I think the goal is to go deeper to help businesses to really go through. And I think a lot of it today we operate in about 40 cities in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. But I think Southeast Asia is way more than 40 cities. I think if you look at Grab, they are at 300 over cities, if I'm not wrong. So I think there's still a long way to go through to build one city at a time, one kampong at a time, one business at a time, right? And I think today, regionally, we are working with about 40,000 businesses, but Southeast Asia has a few million businesses. So I think is driving that. And I think every transactions, every of that, I think our goal is to how to make it easier, cheaper, better, faster. And then I think level that playing field. So I think is think of it if you are an offline business operator. I think our goal is that think of like if any of the let's say whatever garage or whatnot, you see a big player, a big chain can do. So let's say McDonald's can have an ordering machine. How can I have the ordering done without paying the capex, right? So how do you make it happen? If let's say a big player can accept Asia points, how can I make it happen? If a big players can do analytics, how can I make it happen? That the big players can get financing, how can I do it? So I think it's constantly looking at all those aspects. And I think there are many more. Let's say getting supplies, whether getting workers, doing accounting, payroll. So I think eventually our goal is to drive entire end to end, right? To make that happen.
Cool.
That's very inspiring. Okay, so Chen Chow, we have one last question that we ask all of our guests. So in an alternate world, an alternate universe, if Fave doesn't exist, what would Chen Chow do? Like, what would an alternate person of you be doing if it's not Fave?
Yeah. Oh, great one. I think great questions. Yeah. So I think for me personally, I think I'm very passionate on the education and youth. So I think that
Mm-hmm.
in my free time, weekends, spend a lot of time with mentoring. I think spend a lot of time with looking into how to bring up the youth right to the next level because these are the future of the country, future of the world, right? So I think a lot of it is how to. So I think for me, if you ask me what I could do and let's say if I'm not in faith and what not to drive, I think it's constantly looking at that. I think whether with faith or without faith, I think constantly working with young people, seeing the high potentials. Because I think today the young people have so much potential. I think like both of you have achieved so much more than a lot of people of my generation or older generation, right? So I think a lot of young people have a lot of great ideals, great ways to drive that, right? And I think for us to break through, whether as a nation, whether as a world or community, we need the young people to adopt a positive mindset, growth mindset, and transformation mindset, right? And to go through. And I think a lot of time is getting the young people to do things that you're passionate. Because all of us may be passionate at different things. If you're passionate about environment, go and do something on that environment. If you're passionate on old folks, solving the old folks problem, maybe go on it. Yeah, maybe passionate on, let's say, animals, maybe go and solve it. And any aspects that you care about, go and make a difference, right? So I think that in the end is that a way where we all spend some of our time, some of our resources, energy and everything, doing a thing that we care deeply at. I think that's important because I think in the end, our younger generation today no longer care about just pure profit, no longer care about just pure high salary. I think today our younger generation care whether are we making an impact to the real world, right? I think a lot of people joining in a company, even the company may be doing very well, profitable. If they don't feel that what they're doing is making a real impact to the community or society, they will feel like maybe this is not what I want. And I think that's to continue to propagate that, enable people to continually step up, right? I think how can the world have many more Aiman and Shazwan that doing this, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
these Kopi conversations will spark ideas, spark insights, spark inspiration in people. And I think it's just creating more and more because each of this, like let's say people that are listening to this podcast, you never know. That might change someone's life. That may forever transform people's families, people's lives to a better world, right? And I think that's what we want to do. And that person can go on multiplier effect, ripple effect to transform other people. And I think that's where, for me, what I'm passionate about.
That's
Wow.
an amazing
I
end,
don't
right,
I
Aiman?
don't yeah, I don't
I
think that's
can
a better way to end the podcast. Thank you so much,
Chen
Chen
Chow,
Chow,
thank you so much
for
for
being
coming to the
part of
show.
this show. Yep, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shazza. Yeah, all the best. Thanks
All
a
right.
lot for having
Thank
me
you.
with Kopi
Keep in
Thanks.
touch.
Right.
All right. Let's